Hello. How's everybody doing today? Good. Well, my name is Mia Ives-Rublee, and as Casey's just said, I am an alumni. I went to the University of Illinois from 2003 to 2007, and I just wanted to come and talk to you about my story and tell you how sort of I went from being a student athlete to going into activism as a sort of a full-time career. And I wanted to tell you my story because I always have felt that my story, I've always thought of my story as a mathematician's probable equation, and always felt that X plus Y never in my wildest dreams would become Z, because in my life a lot of people would tell me that it was impossible for me to succeed because I had a disability. So how does a disabled girl who was adopted from South Korea go from being an internationally competitive athlete to helping organize one of the biggest marches in history? And my story really begins in Busan, South Korea. I was born in a country that was just trying to recover after multiple colonizations and the Korean War. My birth family, likely impoverished, dropped me off at an orphanage in hopes that I would go to another family that could take care of me. It was the orphanage's doctors who found out that I had a congenital disability called osteogenesis imperfecta. And that's a really long scientific term for saying that I have brittle bones. Now, how many out here have ever broken your bone before? Just like any bone? Couple of people? All right. How many have broken more than 2 bones? 3? So I beat all of you because I have no idea how many bones that I have broken. Because I was so fragile, it was hard for me to know what I could and couldn't do. I remember adults while I was growing up telling me, no, be careful, and you can't do that. And I got those words throughout my childhood. Now, to tell you from experience, it's really hard to dream when you're told repeatedly about what you can't do. It was sports that really taught me how to dream. I remember taking a trip to the 1996 Paralympic Games, and I was 12 at the time, and I never really had that answer of what I wanted to be when I grew up. How many of you sort of knew vaguely what you wanted to do when you were young? Yeah, I mean, all of us had sort of a dream of being, like an astronaut or a fireman or a police officer or something like that. For me, I didn't really have that ability to see myself down the lines, and I didn't really see representation of myself as an adult. And so when I arrived in Atlanta, I was really astonished with how normal I felt within that environment. Growing up, I was used to being stared at for being in a wheelchair. But at the Paralympics, it wasn't unusual to see people who were in wheelchairs, who used sighted canes, who used crutches and prosthetics. People weren't staring at me. For the first time, I didn't feel like a freak show. The weight of people's perceptions of what was normal no longer threatened to squash me, and I finally felt free. Sitting in a huge stadium during the opening ceremonies, I saw thousands of athletes walk, roll, and limp proudly in their country's uniforms. These athletes were being celebrated for their physical prowess rather than being admonished for their physical disabilities. Seeing them sparked something in my spirit that continues to burn to this day. That night, under the Paralympic torch, I began to dream. With my parents' tentative blessings, I was allowed to compete in wheelchair track. I learned a lot of lessons throughout my athletic career. My coaches taught me about persistence, about pushing through the finish line, and about believing that I deserved the same opportunities as my peers. And my parents, which schlepped me from practices and track meets all around the country, taught me about self-advocacy after being left behind for a competition when my high school track team decided not to get an accessible bus. They showed me the tenacity and the skills needed to talk to my coaches, talk to school administrators, and eventually talk to county administrators. Their work helped me to become the first wheelchair athlete to compete in the state high school championships. And I didn't know it then, but they helped lay the groundwork for my advocacy and activism that I do today. My experience in athletics helped me learn how to set goals, and ever since the 1996 Atlanta Paralympics, I knew I wanted to become a Paralympian. As I got into high school, I began to think about college. Originally, college seemed like an impossible goal. In elementary school, I had to rely on adults who helped push me around, help me get dressed, and even shower. But athletics had made me more independent. That meant college was a real possibility. By the time I hit junior year, I knew that I wanted to go to the top wheelchair sports college in the country, which was the U of I. Go Illini. And I was an overachiever when I was in college. I put the skills that I had learned from my track coaches to my academics and extracurricular activities. How many out here do extracurricular activities? Quite a few of you, yeah? How many of you are student athletes? We got one? Any more? All right. Well, for me, I had to learn how to time manage and be persistent and set goals throughout college because I had to balance my school education with my athletic career. I would spend 2 hours a day at practice, attend classes, and participate in extracurricular activities, including Inner Voices. Yeah, all right. It was my sociology major and my time in theater that began to turn my interest towards social justice work. I began to work in social justice spaces by attending protests, working on Student Leadership Council to work on getting rid of the mascot, and creating safe spaces to talk about discrimination and community violence. When I graduated, my dreams began to change. I was still an athlete at heart, but I also wanted to work to create positive change in my community. After my undergraduate career, I enrolled in my master's program at the University of North Carolina in social work and plan to continue to train for Paralympics. Unfortunately, the universe had other plans for me, and I got severely injured my first few weeks in my first semester. I shattered my femur and resulted in 9 surgeries in the next 9 years. It put my athletic careers on hold. The multiple surgeries made me reevaluate my dreams and expectations. I began to realize that I wanted to focus more on giving back to my community. So I redoubled my efforts in school, and after graduation, I began to work with people with mental health disabilities and help them obtain jobs within their communities. I, like many people in 2016, was a bit shocked at the election results. I remember the first morning after the results not wanting to get up out of bed. After a few moments feeling like I was speeding down a tunnel with no end in sight, I made a commitment to myself. I would put more effort into fighting for vulnerable communities, like the communities that I belong to. The first thing that caught my eye was the Women's March. I began to see posts on social media about the Women's March and decided that would be my first act within doing community organizing. After some quick inquiries about the event, I noticed a big hole. Nobody seemed to be talking about accessibility and inclusion of disabled people. That's when I knew I had to do something. I remember vividly during my time as a high school track athlete how my team left me at school because they hadn't gotten an accessible bus. And I knew that if no one spoke up about the issues like my parents did for me, that there would be thousands of people feeling the same way I did when I was in high school. Boy, I didn't really know what I was getting up to when I decided to contact the Women's March. I spent the next few weeks emailing the organizers for the march. When I finally got someone, I explained to them the importance of including disabled people. I spent hours organizing and coordinating, trying to ensure that the unity principles were inclusive of disabled people, and that the march had accessibility services so that disabled people would feel included in the march. On the day of that march, it was estimated that over 40,000 disabled people participated across the country. Interestingly, the thrill that I got from organizing the march was the same adrenaline rush that I got when I was training in athletics. The lessons I learned in athletics helped me prepare to be a better activist and advocate. I've spent the past 2 years speaking with senators and representatives. I've marched 18 miles for gun control, and again, I use my athletic prowess to be able to do that. And I've also spoken to thousands, telling them about my story and urging folks to act better for their communities. Now, I'm asking that you take a moment and think about your own life story. Think about the memorable events that have happened in your life and help to shape your worldview. We all have stories to tell, stories that inspire us and that can lead us towards change. I ask that you use your own stories to help fight the issues that motivate you to act. This is how we make the change and create the world that we want to see. Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate being back in my alma mater. Now, I'd like to take any questions that people have or comments, anything that I can answer.
What specifically were you lobbying senators and representatives about? Can you tell us a little bit about the specifics of that?
Yeah, so the question was basically what have I been lobbying on, what have I been working on? And I work on a variety of issues that addresses a lot of the communities that I belong to. Right now I'm working on adoptee rights issues, especially inter-country adoption issues. A lot of adoptees that have been adopted out of country actually don't have their citizenship. And so what I'm doing right now is trying to work on a new bill that would help ensure that they would receive, Okay. We'll just hold it. Is that good? Yeah? All right. So like I was saying, I have been working on adoptee issues and trying to help ensure that they receive citizenship, the citizenship that they were promised when they came to this country. So that's one thing that I've been working on. I've also been working on disability rights issues, including mass criminalization and mass incarceration, and working on immigration issues, especially around kids being detained in camps. So those are the main issues that I've been working on so far. Anybody else? Yeah. Have I thought about running for office? Not yet. I think I want to get some other things done before maybe looking into that realm. I think there's a ton of people, amazing people who are running for office, and I definitely want to support their work and see how I can change things from the outside. Yeah?
One thing that's most disappointing to you regarding
Okay, one thing, you asked what was the one thing that has been disappointing to me in American politics. I think that, as we all know, a lot of times people aren't listening to each other. And I think that's the biggest disappointment for me, is that we all have very entrenched ideas and beliefs on what should happen. And one thing that I learned, especially when I was going through the School of Social Work, was learning to listen, and to learn to listen actively. I also learned that in interactive theater. And so it's really important that we listen to individuals, especially individuals affected by the policies that we're creating, because they're the individuals that know best what is helpful within their communities. And what I've seen is a lot of times we'll make policies and not realize the implications of those policies and the people that are most marginalized by them. Any other questions? Yeah.
What obstacles did you run into when you were organizing the march?
So I got a question, what obstacles that I ran into while organizing the march. I think there were a couple of different obstacles that I faced during the march. And I would say one of the biggest ones was having people understand what I was talking about when I was talking about being inclusive of disabled people. A lot of people assume when I'm talking about inclusion is that I'm talking about accessibility. And that's not what I'm talking about when I want full inclusion. When I talk about full inclusion, I'm talking about making sure that individuals who are marginalized, like the disability community, are able to make some of the decisions at the table, and are able to talk at the table, and are able to create that dialogue and be fully included. And so I think that's always been an issue that I've been facing throughout the work that I do, but especially during the march. Any other questions? Yeah. Zini, hold on. Yeah. When you work with animals, you never know what they're going to do. Good boy. What were you saying? Yeah. So the question was, like, what was your experience at the march? What was the feelings at the march? And I think, wow. So I had been organizing for 2 months. It was a massive, like, logistical feat to try and get something like this done. We actually didn't know exactly how many people would attend at the time. We kept on, the numbers kept on spiking, especially the night before. We were just like, oh my gosh, we're not sure how we're gonna deal with this many people on the ground. And you know, I had actually not gotten any sleep that night, and had pneumonia as well, so it was not a great way to go into something like that. But you know, I got there on the ground at about 3 a.m. in the morning when we were trying to set everything up, and that was because we weren't allowed to set anything up until after the inauguration event. And so we were getting everything put up, all the tents and stuff like that, at 3 a.m. And we started noticing people trickle in at, I would say, 5 o'clock. People coming from out of town from buses were starting to trickle in. And I would say by 7 or 8 o'clock, you literally couldn't see past, you know, a couple 100 feet because there's so many people there. And I think what was amazing was just the feeling of camaraderie, and the feeling that there were other people who were concerned about the future of our country and concerned about individual rights. And I think for me, you know, it was a bit of a whirlwind just because I was extremely tired, but I think it was hard to understand the impact that we had until after the event, and I would say even a couple of weeks later, to really understand the magnitude that we did, and that it helped to spark so many other movements within our communities to really start standing up and talking about the issues that we're facing in our communities. Any other questions? You can ask me anything. Yeah, so Miles asked me if, after my femur, I'd run into some obstacles, and what other obstacles that I've faced while doing the work that I've done. And I think one thing I would say is ego. And it's something that I talk about a lot with individuals, especially when they're first getting into activism, and even when they're providing services on the ground, is learning about ego and learning about putting away your ego. I think a lot of times, like I said, people are pretty staunch on like what their beliefs are and what their ideas are and how they think that things should be solved. And I think what I have learned really quickly is the importance of understanding that you don't know everything, which is really hard to state sometimes, and to understand that the individuals that you're working with often know more than you do, and to listen to critiques even if you feel uncomfortable during that time, and not allow the first reaction to be to lashing out. My term and my sort of motto is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. That doesn't mean that you allow people to abuse you or to use you, whatever. It just means allowing yourself to step back for a minute, listen to people's criticisms or people's ideas before you, and then evaluate your own ideas and your own beliefs, and see if there's things that relate to each other, and see if that changes your ideas, or if there's room to grow and change and learn more about the situations and ideas and concepts that you're trying to work on. Any other questions? These are really good questions. Yeah? So the question was, is how do I train myself to be patient when encountering differences and such? And I think, I think part of that has come from my training as a social worker, learning to sort of take myself out of the equation and try and think of things in a little more objective manner. I think that understanding and empathizing with other groups of individuals, even, an individual who you're talking to, and being able to sit there and listen to what they have to say and figure out where they're coming from has helped me, and learning to do that active listening and not creating your own ideas while you're quote unquote listening to an individual. So actually listening to the individual while they're talking before you start thinking about what your response is. Those are the sort of key things that I try to do, and I'm definitely not perfect at it, but it's something that I try and continuously do is listen to folks and really be open to different possibilities. Anybody else? Yes. So the question is basically, the fact that I had a difficult time getting up after the election, the morning after, and sort of what I find helpful. And I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the negatives and thinking about what we want to change. And we don't spend a lot of time celebrating the things that are going right and even the small little achievements that you make. And I would say, I really encourage individuals to celebrate the things that you're grateful for in your community. And even if things don't go exactly your way, understanding what the things that went right and analyzing what you can do next, right? So I always encourage folks, one, to celebrate even the little changes that you make in the world. And two is figure out what you enjoy and use that in a way that can create positive change. So for me, you know, when I'm talking to individuals and, you know, like I talk about, you know, how I do athletics, I talk to them about how my athletics brings joy to my life and how I can use that as a way to talk to individuals about disability rights, or I can talk to them about other issues that I'm really interested in. And you can be really creative in the ways that you organize your community. And so just finding things that you enjoy and using it as a way or a model to create the joy that you want to see in your community. I think one thing that I've seen often people say, especially in the civil rights movement, is joy is resistance, right? And to be able to find joy is a part of that resistance and resiliency that you want to build within your community. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank you all so much for being such good listeners and coming and attending. Feel free to stop me on your way out if you have any questions that you didn't want to say right now. Thank you.